life.
Okay. So, بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله تعالى وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. So let's continue on from where we left off, inshallah. In the last few lines were basically about focusing on one's own faults. So I just quickly translate it. So Imam Muhasibi says that one should always carefully consider one's intention and one's motivation, and should busy themselves with rectifying their own selves, so that keeps them preoccupied with regards to or from the faults of others. So the idea is that we're disinterested in the faults of other people because we're so busy with ourselves. We're so busy with rectifying our own selves. And it says, because it used to be said as a saying that it is a sufficient flaw in a person that faults that they cannot see in themselves become apparent to them in others. So, meaning that they have a kind of, they're better at finding fault in other people, and they'll find in other people the very faults that they themselves have. That their preoccupation with the faults of others blinds them from the same fault in themselves. And he says that that's, that's the only, if there was one evil that could destroy a person, then that one would be sufficient. Okay, so we've discussed that, but so continuing on, he says, واستعمل لله عقلك بترك التدبير واستعن بالله على صرف المقادير. قال علي رضي الله تعالى عنه: يا ابن آدم لا تفرح بالغنى ولا تقنط بالفقر ولا تحزن بالبلاء ولا تفرح بالرخاء، فإن الذهب يجرب بالنار وإن العبد الصالح يجرب بالبلاء، وإنك لا تنال ما تريد إلا بترك ما تشتهي، ولن تبلغ ما تؤمل إلا بالصبر على ما تكره، وابذل جهدك لرعاية ما افترض عليك. So I'll translate the whole paragraph first. So use your intelligence for the sake of Allah, or you can translate it as activate your intelligence or your aql, your mind, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by giving up too much, giving up planning. What he means by that is too much dependence upon your own plans. And what that basically means, that if a person is so preoccupied with getting every single plan right, then ultimately that preoccupation will decrease the amount of time and effort they're able to give purely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he goes on to kind of clarify, he says, وَاسْتَعِنْ بِاللَّهِ عَلَى صَرْفِ الْمَقَادِيرِ. and seek Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's assistance in um, uh, in the execution of your destiny, meaning that when it comes to your fate and your future and what is going to happen in your future, rather than seeking the assistance of other people, or rather than looking to yourself and your plans, make sure that you're constantly seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's help when it comes to where your destiny is going to fall, or how your future is going to shape up. Ali radiallahu anhu said that, O son of Adam, do not be do not celebrate um, uh, wealth. Do not celebrate being wealthy, and do not despair of being poor. Um, do not grieve over tribulations, right? The tribulations and difficulties faced in life. So do not grieve over tribulations, and do not celebrate ease. Right. So things were difficult. Now that they're easy, do not become overly happy of the fact that life is easy. Right. Life is comfortable. So do not overly celebrate comfort, basically, because gold is always tested by fire. Gold is always tested with fire, meaning in order to check the quality of gold, it has to be subjected to burning and to fire, right? To the tribulation of fire. And likewise, and in a similar fashion, a pious servant is always tested through difficulty. Um, uh, and you will never achieve what you want except by abandoning what you desire, and you will never achieve what you desire except by having patience over that which you dislike. So on the one hand, a person success a person's success lies in, or ultimate success lies in, giving up or compromising on their desires, and on the other hand, um, uh, those same, as when therefore when things become unpleasant for them because of the sacrifices that they made, um, their success also lies in being able to have patience over these unpleasantries, or over these difficult situations and circumstances. وَابْذُلْ جُهْدَكَ لِرِعَايَةِ مَا افْتُرِضَ عَلَيْكَ, and concentrate your effort um, on 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 giving attention to that which has been made obligatory upon you. Alaykum salam wa rahmatullah. So if I can, so that paragraph, right? If you separate the paragraph into two parts, so that the last sentence, that focus your efforts on the things that have been made obligatory upon you, and then everything he said about difficulty and ease and giving up desires and having patience on things that are undesirable and so on. The idea basically is that our preoccupation should be on the things, on the duties that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed upon us, and not so much, our preoccupation shouldn't be so much about what happens in life, right? So most people, the opposite is true for them. This is for everyone, right? So like I can tell you about my last week, and the story is going to be about being preoccupied with what happened on the Monday, and then what happened on the Tuesday, and what happened on the Thursday. And those preoccupations essentially they ultimately contradict with what we're supposed to be preoccupied with. Okay, and the idea is that life is going to be a mixture of of like moments of happiness and moments of ease, but then difficulties and suffering and so on and so forth, over which we're required to be patient, right? And some of that, often what we will find is that the things that stress us out the most are probably the things that we can't change, right? usually things that you can change and you can do something about. You mislabel them if you think of them as stressful. Then they're probably challenges. So if there's something, if there's a difficulty that you can overcome, or if there's something that's happened that you can change, right, or rectify, then the test here isn't a test of patience. The test here is a test of action, right? Because over here you're asked to change the situation and make it better. So, in a moral context, if evil happens in front of you and you have the ability to stop it, right? You're not expected there to have patience in the face of that evil. You're expected to change it, to stop it, right? So if you can physically stop it, then you physically stop it. It is only if you are physically unable to stop it that you are required to then try to verbally stop it, if that is within your capacity. And only if that is also not within one's capacity, as the hadith tells us, then one is patient over that evil and they hate it from their heart. Does that make sense? Meaning the level of patience, really, the patience kicks in when one's istita'ah, or one's capacity to change, either physically or verbally, is no longer there, right? And they have no choice but to accept it, right? They accept that I can't change this, so therefore I have to dislike it from my heart, right? And obviously the Prophet ﷺ says, وَذَلِكَ أَضْعَفُ الْإِيمَانِ. So often the things that cause stress are usually the things that we feel are beyond our control, right? But preoccupation with those things become the things that preoccupy us from that which Allah has made obligatory upon us, the duties that Allah has made obligatory upon us. So a good practice is to learn sabr over things that we can't change, right? So that we make mental space for our fara'id, for our ibadah, for our salat and so forth. Because these things, or our ibadah and our duties, will suffer because of our despair. So he speaks about despair. So because despair ultimately will weaken a person, it will cause ajz, which we pray against, a kind of like a paralysis, an inability to act, which is ultimately depression, basically. But this all comes from being too concerned about things that one really doesn't have the ability to change. Okay, so just to break that down. So when he says give up planning in the first line, that don't plan, seek, activate your intelligence for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by not planning too much for the future. What is the proper way to rationalize that? Because we know that not all planning is bad, and we know that we are required to take recourse to means, to wasa'il. The asbab are important. We know that there is the hadith that tells us about tying the camel and then trusting in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So how do we balance it out? So not relying on one's plans this is a kind of a generalized statement. What is intended is that do not completely depend upon the plans of your mind, the things that your mind or your intellect plans out for the future. Do not entirely depend upon that, because your intellect's ability to foresee or plan for all of the variables of the future and take into account all of the variables of the future, whether it's planning just tomorrow, right? So there is how you want tomorrow to happen, right? Which is what your plan is going to take into consideration. And then there is what tomorrow has in store for you, and all of the variables that come with that, right? They're two different things. So yes, something of a plan, it may well be necessary, but you do not entirely depend upon that plan, because your intellect's ability to take into consideration all of the variables is limited. Um, so and it is at this point that you have to kind of say, okay, I intend to do X, Y, and Z, and I plan for X, Y, and Z. Then after that, I submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's decree. Um, However, my planning is simply is simply to the extent of a sabab min al asbab. So you know the whole tying the camel concept, right? So planning, so us kind of making plans for tomorrow is it's part of the process of tying the camel. Does that make sense? It's part of the process of tying the camel, and then the variables are what you rely upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for. Okay, and that's important, and obviously, you know, you don't you don't there are questions of capacity here, right? So if you're an architect, and there are that it's part and parcel of the process of designing a building, to try to consider quite a number of details in your plan. You don't apply this principle and say, no, I have to allow some space for tawakkul, right? Tawakkul and not relying upon one's plans are about the variables of life, right? Not about things that one is supposed to plan for. So there is a balance that one has to achieve. But the important thing is to find those parts of our life that are unplannable, right? And to consciously declare one's trust and reliance in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? To always focus on the variables of life that are beyond one's control, so that there are always things in life for which we say, I submit to Allah, I trust in Allah, I completely hand my affair over to Allah. وَأُفَوِّضُ أَمْرِي إِلَى اللَّهِ, for example. In the story of Musa alayhi salam and Fir'aun, there was that believing man who, after having done his bit in giving da'wah to Fir'aun, eventually says, فَسَتَذْكُرُونَ مَا أَقُولُ لَكُمْ وَأُفَوِّضُ أَمْرِي إِلَى اللَّهِ. That look, I've given you my advice and my nasiha, and perhaps in the future you'll remember what I have just told you. Soon you will remember what I have said to you, meaning you will find the truth of what I have said to you. But I've done my bit. وَأُفَوِّضُ أَمْرِي إِلَى اللَّهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ بَصِيرٌ بِالْعِبَادِ. And I submit my affair to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees the affairs of his servants, right? Meaning he's done his time, he's come about, he's done his part, and then he's submitting and leaving it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he's declaring that as a statement of faith, as a statement of iman. So that requires activation. So this is part of the meaning of using our intellect for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, using our mind, activating our mind for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, finding the variables in life that are going to activate our reliance, activate our trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because otherwise you don't know where the lines are, right? So you say, so we offer the lip service, oh, I trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but we don't know how pronounced it is where, right? And of course we're not that there are lots and lots of things that we seek to control. Okay, so where in our daily lives do we engage our tawakkul? Where in our daily lives do we engage our trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is the point. So you can actually tie this in with niyyah. So abstract. So actions can have. It's easy to understand. It's easy to see how niyyah plays a part when you're about to do something physical. You're about to pray. Niyyah is required, right? But how do you activate intention if it's not a physical act, but it's a mental act or a spiritual act? Okay, so it's harder there to pinpoint the point at which your trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is challenged, and therefore you overcome that challenge by actually trusting. Does that make sense? So therefore, we think through. So Sayyidina Ali radiallahu anhu, he has this reflection in life where he says that Araftullah bi faskhil awazim. It's a famous statement attributed to Ali radiallahu anhu, that I got to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by the breaking of my resolutions. Right? So meaning things that I had intended, the things that I had intended in life, I'd resolved to do in life, then subsequently was unable to do, right? That my plans end up kind of not finding execution. They don't find fruition. Is that it is in those moments of my life when my plans don't come to bear fruit, when my great resolutions break, is there that I came to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So you come to know that you come to know that I don't ultimately control every aspect of my life, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ultimately controlled, and ultimately Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's decree is final. I have a duty to plan, and I have a duty to tie the camel, and I have a duty to prepare and plan and so on, and I have a duty to do it well, right? But I do not control the ultimate outcome is not controlled by me. So for him, he found Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and came to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the breaking of his azai. Another thing I want to say here is that when a person wants something but doesn't get it, so you open a business, and that's a really good example for a lot of people, right? So you invest some money or you open a business, and you've committed to a business plan. You've committed money, you've committed effort, you've committed time. And frustratingly, there's the same business 2 blocks down, thriving and successful, and you do all of the things that business is doing, right? You make you do the same business planning. You have the same great location, and you've considered every aspect, and still, but you're not as successful as the other. You're barely breaking even, and you're struggling, and so on and so forth. Here, you come to realize that somehow the other person, he was destined to be successful, right? And he's destined to receive a greater share of wealth from the same or similar effort than you were destined to receive. You appear to be destined for deprivation from that wealth. And so in that moment, a person has to remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy upon his slaves is differentiated mercy, meaning that it isn't something that applies to everybody equally. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows every single servant individually. So Allah knows his servants. Allah knows all of us. Allah doesn't just know all of us collectively. He doesn't just know our collective destiny. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't just know that we are all collectively going to attend this halaqah tonight. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows how each one of us individually will respond to their experience in this hour. So there is a differentiated understanding of each person, and knowledge of each person's destiny and each person's response to situations, circumstances, challenges, and so on. And so, when we say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is merciful upon all, and Allah is more merciful than our mothers, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Allah's mercy overpowers and precedes on his wrath and so on, then we have to bear in mind that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy is a detailed mercy. And therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is more merciful upon a person Allah is more merciful towards people than people are themselves, because people do not know what is good for them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does. And what we think of as good for ourselves is not necessarily good for ourselves, and what we think of as bad for ourselves is not necessarily bad for ourselves. And in the ultimate result, when it comes to the akhirah, it may well be that our salvation relies on a heavy dose of patience. Patience being one of the few, I think one of three things for which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reserves an unspecified, unlimited amount of reward. So there are a few things for which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't declare how much reward He will give. He just says He will discretionarily give reward without any counting, without any hisab, right? And sabr is one of those things. إِنَّمَا يُوَفَّى الصَّابِرُونَ أَجْرَهُمْ بِغَيْرِ حِسَابٍ. And so sometimes the difficult circumstances in a person's life are the key to that person's salvation. Like a person who suffers a decade of sickness right at the end of their life. They're bedbound for 10 years, right? And before they pass away. And people, they're sick for 6 months, and you get it. It kind of makes, okay, sick for 6 months. And then it's a year, and you start wondering, this guy's been bedbound for a year. Then 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, and this just stops making sense. You're thinking, like, why does the guy have to suffer so much, right? But the point is that in that apparently senseless suffering of one person is the opportunity for salvation of a number of people, or is the test for a number of people. Every test is an opportunity, right? So there is how the family responds and reacts to the suffering of a family member. There is, if this person is conscious, if this person is still conscious, right? So, their mind is still well, then it's their thought processes and how they bear that suffering and so on, and how that enables them or allows them, or whether it allows them to reflect upon their past and on their sins, and whether they're able to see that this is perhaps an opportunity for those sins to be expiated and for them to be wiped clean. That perhaps there is something about them that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves, and therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not want them to carry sins over into the hereafter, into the akhirah, and into the barzakh, and so on. All right, that this is not just, that this is both a manifestation of mercy, but also a manifestation of justice, right? But an easier justice, a one that one can tolerate, or one that offers many opportunities to others. An apparent punishment in the dunya for a believer, right, is inevitably expiation, right? Because but if they can tolerate and have patience, and it's not exclusive, and this suffering is not because necessarily because one is bad. It's not because one is sinful necessarily, right? So some of the most pious, we have stories, right, of the pious servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala suffering. So Ayyub alayhi salam is a prophet of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who is tested with a debilitating disease. There's the famous story of Imran ibn Hussein radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who for years was bedridden to the point that he had to that they had to cut a hole in his bed so that he could, because in those days they didn't have the technology, right? So that he used to have to relieve himself um, in his bed. But the way they got around the problem was to cut a hole in his bed, right? And this is a famous Sahabi of the Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam. But then his story, on the other hand, is that he is, I think, one of two Sahaba that I've come across who are recorded to have interacted with angels. Imran Hussein radiallahu anhu is one of, I think, two Sahabis that I've come across who have had some sort of physical interaction with the angelic world. Such was their maqam before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But apparently their situation in the dunya for many, many years is one of extreme suffering. So therefore, the advice is that that one always prepares oneself to be patient in the face of suffering. Now, another aspect to this, especially when we talk about tying the camel, is that tying the camel is not a half-hearted measure. Okay, so this is a bit of an issue with Muslims because we value tawakkul. This is an issue with practicing Muslims in particular because we value the idea of relying on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and having tawakkul in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We feel as though we don't have to fully prepare. Like we feel as though our preparation can be somewhat, it can be a bit shoddy. It doesn't have to, because at the end of the day, we rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the result is from Allah. Okay. What we don't realize in that situation is that we're responsible for we are accountable for poor preparation. We're accountable for poor preparation. Like a direct dalil for this kind of idea is that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us that كتب الله الإحسان على كل شيء. Or إن الله كتب الإحسان على كل شيء. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed excellence into everything. He has written excellence into everything. And then he gives the example of when we hunt or when we slaughter animals, that it has to be done in an excellent manner. It has to be done in a way that is perfect, right? That reduces the suffering of the animal. The knife has to be perfectly sharpened. All of this requires a certain preparation to ensure that there is in something that is part of daily life. It's tied to our daily bread. In those days, if you want meat, you hunt, you kill, right? And the Prophet ﷺ said that even then, it's like, well, what's the big deal? I mean, you're ending the animal's life anyway, so might as well end it however. Right? What difference does it make? You hit it with a rock, or shoot it with a gun, or hit it with an arrow, or whatever it is, right? What's the big deal? So stab it in. It doesn't matter where you stab it, as long as it dies. No, it has to be done in a particular way. There has to be ihsan even in that act, right? And so, but the hadith begins with that same ihsan, that same kind of, that same being procedural, being methodical, preparing, etc., is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has decreed in everything that a person does. So the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, the greatest of all of the prophets, without a shadow of a doubt, if anybody can expect the direct intervention of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a challenging situation, it would be the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam above any other person in creation. Agreed? But did the Prophet alayhi salatu wasallam go into any battle unprepared? Did he go into any battle without a plan? Did he go into any battle without a strategy? No. And did he go into a battle with a half-hearted strategy because at the end of the day he trusts in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And at the end of the day the result belongs with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I just have to tick the box and have a plan, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will do the rest. Right? No. Instead, if you carefully study how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala discusses these types of incidents in the Quran, you find that the stronger the believers. So first, strength, right? A person's physical strength. So does it matter that you're strong or weak? Does it matter? Right? So what? I mean, we trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The angels will come, they will help us, we will be victorious. It doesn't matter whether we're skinny, fat, fit, unfit, big, small, muscular, not trained, untrained. What does it matter? Right? So no. The Prophet ﷺ tells us that al-mu'min al-qawiyyu khayrun min al-mu'min al-da'ifu fi kullin khayr. The Prophet ﷺ says that the strong believer is better than the weak believer, but there is good in everyone. He acknowledges that, yeah, it's not. Sometimes the fact that somebody else is stronger than you isn't within your control. But the strong believer is better. One should try to be stronger. But there is good in all, right? When it comes to the status enjoyed by the Sahaba who were better trained in battle, who were more victorious in battle, is well established and well recorded. Well, they didn't become like that without preparation, without hours and hours and hours and hours of training and preparation. And the same goes with everything else. The Prophet ﷺ's systematic strategy to use the prisoners of Badr, the prisoners after the Battle of Badr, to teach the Sahaba how to read and write. Right? So that the Muslims could independently write scripture and so on. And the strategy to kind of learn that off of the mushrikun who had been taken prisoner after the Battle of Badr. And the overall, the Prophet ﷺ's strategy and his strategizing and his planning and his ability to try to take into consideration any eventuality, the great strategy in the Battle of Uhud, which is studied and so on. It's all part of the Prophet ﷺ demonstrating in practice what is meant by tying the camel and trusting in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when it comes to the ultimate outcome. And we do not stress, we do not preoccupy our mind with things that are beyond our control, but we make sure that we plan for the things that are within our control. And we do not plan half-heartedly, but we try to achieve excellence. We try to push for excellence. Now, this isn't a criticism, but it could be. I mean, perhaps this is a criticism, right? That sometimes when we speak about trusting in Allah and tawakkul without qualification, it can come across in a way that it misinforms people. So when we speak about tawakkul in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and trusting in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it isn't difficult to see how a person can misunderstand that and think that they don't need to tie the camel, or more importantly, they don't need to tie the camel well. Does that make sense? It's easy to see how people can end up with that misunderstanding if they are when they're exhorted and encouraged to have tawakkul without any qualification. So it's like, oh, just trust in Allah. So what does it mean when we're encouraged in the Quran and the Sunnah to just trust? And how does it, and obviously it's difficult when a person doesn't have the rest of the context, the other ahadith that clarify. Right? So some of the ahadith I've mentioned to you clarify what is intended by it. The Prophet's seerah clarifies that tawakkul does not mean not planning, not strategizing, and so on and so forth. So then why is there unqualified exhortation, unqualified encouragement towards tawakkul? Well, because tawakkul as a state of mind is unqualified. Tawakkul as a spiritual state is unqualified. For a person's constant spiritual state, their constant mental state to be one of tawakkul, despite all of their preparation. So the principles of life is a given, because that's based on the sunnah of Allah. That's based upon how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has set the universe, the laws of the universe, the laws of how things plan out in real life. Right? And then there is the spiritual conditioning of the soul. When it comes to the spiritual conditions of the soul, tawakkul is without condition, meaning we trust. We absolutely trust in Allah. We trust in His decree. We trust that good and bad comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ultimately, and it's without qualification. The other part of it, meaning real life in terms of preparation and planning, in terms of thinking about where my daily bread is going to come from, in terms of thinking about how we are going to deal with a particular problem in community and in society and so on, and the planning that is required for that, and the plan and that is encouraged in the Sunnah, that is seen in the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is simply a given in life. It's something that is you just accept as normal. The spiritual narrative of tawakkul is not supposed to negatively impact upon that, and it's supposed to also counteract the attitude to be entirely dependent upon one's plan and one's action, so that when one doesn't get the desired result, one despairs because they've thrown everything at it, because they were so confident, they were so certain that ultimately it's my own actions are the ones that are going to produce the result. So when the result doesn't come, they despair. Okay, so there's a need to kind of strike a balance. Okay, and so you have this balance between not over celebrating wealth and not despairing as a result of poverty, not grieving as a result of difficult circumstances, and not over celebrating easy and comfortable circumstances. So a few kind of instances. The famous lexicographer Imam Firuzabadi, right? He writes that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chooses to test a person sometimes with happy circumstances so that they may be patient, and then وَتَارَةً بِالْمَضَارِّ لِيَصْبِرُوا, sometimes He tests them with difficult circumstances, constricted circumstances, so that they may be patient. So in that scenario, minha and mihna, two apparently similar words, but meaning completely opposite, having with completely opposite meaning. So mihna is a trying situation, a trial, a difficulty, and minha is something that is perceived as a gift, so something really good and positive, right? These both become tests. They both become tests. But each has a different requirement. Each requires a different response. So the mihna, which is the test or the difficult situation, requires patience. But the situation that is seen as a gift from Allah, as a bounty from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, requires a different response, which is the response of gratitude. However, this bit's important. This is why I wanted to share this. However, he observes that القيام بحقوق الصبر أيسر من القيام بحقوق الشكر. In his opinion, fulfilling the requirements of patience is easier than fulfilling the requirements of gratitude. In his opinion, it's easier to be patient than it is to fulfill the requirements of gratitude. So therefore, of the two trying circumstances, the mihna and the minha, right? The gift of a bountiful state and the trying state becomes the better of the two tests. Meaning to be in a situation where one is in struggle, is facing obstacles, is facing difficulties, that appears to be the better test to be in, because the requirement of that test, which is patience, is easier to fulfill than the alternative, which is the test of having a bountiful life the requirement of which is shukr, which is a lot more difficult to fulfill. And I'll talk about why that might be. And so he cites something from Umar radiallahu anhu, who said that in their lives as the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that we were tested with difficulty, so we were patient. We were able to be patient. We succeeded in being patient. وَبُلِينَ بِالسَّرَّاءِ فَلَمْ نَصْبِرْ. But when it came to being tested with good circumstances and happy circumstances, our patience failed. Meaning, and over here by patience he's implying the ability to steadfastly fulfill the requirements of that situation. So when they were tested with ease, when ease happened, fitna began. Difficulties started to appear in society. Ali radiallahu anhu says that whoever has easy circumstances in the dunya, man wussi'a alayhi fi dunyahu, whoever has easy circumstances in their worldly lives, but doesn't recognize that they are being, that somehow a game is being played with them, and that they are in a deceptive situation, then such a person is truly deceived and deluded. Right? So to have a life of ease and comfort and knowing where your next meal is coming from and knowing where your next salary is coming from and have a steady roof over your head and so on and so forth, to have these circumstances and to not recognize that actually this is a really, really tough spiritual situation to be in. He says that a person that doesn't recognize that and doesn't recognize that this person is actually being tested in a far greater, almost being toyed with as far as their trial in life is concerned, is that such a person is deluded. If you don't recognize that, then you're deluded. And he says, and then he quotes the verse, وَنَبْلُوكُمْ بِالشَّرِّ وَالْخَيْرِ فِتْنَةً وَإِلَيْنَا تُرْجَعُونَ, that we test you with good and bad circumstances, and you will ultimately return unto us. Right. So why is gratitude hard? Right. Firstly, gratitude is hard because it's very like patience, right? You're facing a difficult situation, and your patience is about doing the best you can in the situation you are given, and bearing the suffering, right? And and bearing it without blaming Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, recognizing that this was decreed for you and recognizing that there is reward in this. The thing about gratitude is that so there is a kind, you can kind of limit the idea of sabr to a few things. Gratitude is kind of a little bit open-ended in nature, because the nature of ease is open-ended. Like we compared to a poor person in I don't know, Bangladesh or Pakistan, for example, right? In the third world somewhere. Our life, if we start counting the bounties in comparison to somebody who's living on £1 a day or £2 a day, is an open-ended exercise. It's really, really difficult to like work through and try to count all of the blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given. Right? So, and because our life is like that, and everybody has lots and lots to compare about, but ultimately, they say that if you want to understand, if you want to know how grateful you have to be, then look at the deprived, but then compare your life to the person who is deprived, and never compare your life to the person who has more than you, right? Because otherwise, the gratitude is impossible. Because to the billionaire, you're just a poor person, right? But if you start counting your blessings against people who haven't received those blessings, which is the majority of the world. So we, for example, people in this room are better off than the majority of humanity, right? On the earth. And then on that basis, we start counting our blessings. All of a sudden, it becomes very, very difficult to count them. Because they're kind of open-ended in nature, right? When are you going to run out of money? So that blessing, right? That blessing, can we ever foresee for ourselves, reasonably foresee for ourselves, a time when we might starve? or not be able to eat our next meal. But that is the life of like billions of people. If they don't know where the next meal is coming from. Meaning this our life isn't normal. That's normal life. Normal life is to work and to toil for every single meal. Right? And to celebrate when you've got your lunch after somehow scrounging your breakfast, right? And then you've made arrangements for lunch, so it's like, okay, that next meal is taken care of. And then if you've secured 2, 3, 4 meals in a row, then you're rich, that you're wealthy. But we're in a situation where we can't foresee a situation in which we might not be able to get our next meal. So this blessing, for example, is completely open-ended. So now how do you put a finger on what the requirement of gratitude is? When the blessing is so open-ended. And therefore, how do you fulfill the requirement of something like that? And this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَقَلِيلٌ مِّنْ عِبَادِيَ الشَّكُورِ. Few are my grateful servants. Right? Because of all of the people who are required to have gratitude, so Allah has only good things to say about patient people. Right? Inna Allah ma'as sabirin. Allah is with the patient people. Right? The people of patience will be given their reward without any reckoning. Meaning, usually all discussions about patience are positive, but when it comes to gratitude, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says things like, لَإِن شَكَرْتُمْ لَأَزِيدَنَّكُمْ وَلَإِن كَفَرْتُمْ إِنَّ عَذَابِي لَشَدِيدٌ. If you're grateful, then I'll increase, but if you're ungrateful, then my punishment is severe. And only a few of my servants are grateful. وَقَلِيلٌ مِّنْ عِبَادِيَ الشَّكُورِ. It's an indication of how difficult gratitude is. Because it's difficult, very few of Allah's servants are grateful, right? Because of all of the people of all of the bounties for which a person is required to be grateful, people in easy circumstances, the requirement of gratitude in them exponentially increases. It exponentially increases to the point that it becomes impossible. It becomes impossible to fulfill it. So it's almost as if, not that I'm meaning like this, but it's almost as if this is the test, right? It's like it's as daunting as that other person who's preoccupied with just survival. Like their preoccupation with survival, this other comfortable person, it's almost as if they're required to be constantly preoccupied with how they are to be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because the burden of gratitude is so huge. Okay? So if we think about it, it's gratitude it's hard. It's much, much harder. Okay? Right. So inshallah, one or two more paragraphs quickly. وارض بما أرادك الله به. قال ابن مسعود رضي الله تعالى عنه ارضى بما قسم الله لك تكن من أغنى الناس واجتنب ما حرم الله عليك تكن من أورع الناس وأدي ما افترض الله عليك تكن من أعبد الناس. And be pleased with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants for you. Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu ta'ala anhu says that be pleased with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has apportioned for you, and you will become the wealthiest of people. So whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you, be pleased with that, accept that. And by pleased here we mean content. Be content with that, and you'll be the wealthiest of people, because you'll never look at the bounties enjoyed by another person, because you're content with whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has granted you. وَاجْتَنِبْ مَا حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْكَ تَكُنْ مِنْ أَوْرَعِ النَّاسِ. And refrain from that which Allah has made haram upon you, and you will be the most pious of people. But the most scrupulous, the most pious of people. Meaning, all that's required for piety is that a person avoids haram. All the piety is simple. Piety in its simplest definition is easy, in the sense that all that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants is that we avoid the haram. Right? When it comes to doing good deeds, there's a qualification. That qualification is اتق الله ما استطعت. Allah tells us that have taqwa of Allah, have piety of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as much as you can. You do as much good as you can. Right? The Prophet said, ما أمرتكم به فأتوا ما نهيتكم عنه فاجتنبوا وما أمرتكم به فأتوا منه ما استطعتم. That anything I forbid you from doing, i.e. the haram, then don't do it. Right? Stay away from it. But whatever I command you to do, then do as much of it as you can. There is this qualification of trying to do as much as one is able to do. And therefore, the route to taqwa, the secret to taqwa is in avoiding haram. Or the secret of piety is in avoiding haram. وَأَدِّ مَا افْتَرَضَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْكَ تَكُنْ مِنْ أَعْبَدِ النَّاسِ. And fulfill that which is, do that which Allah has made obligatory upon you, and you will be the most worshipping of people, meaning that you will be the best worshippers. Right? Meaning the secret to worship is to fulfill one's fara'id. So remember the hadith in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the hadith Qudsi, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, whoever is an enemy or a friend of mine, I declare war against him. And then he goes on to provide the secret of friendship with Allah, that no servant of mine has ever drawn near to me with anything more beloved to me than that which I have made obligatory upon him. Meaning the way, Allah's most preferred way for a person to draw near to him is for a person to fulfill their obligations. Right? Their fard salah, their fard sawm, their fard zakah, their fard hajj, their fard zakah, the obligations towards others, the huquq al-ibad, the obligatory rights of Allah's creation. So one's children, one's parents, one's siblings, these obligatory duties and dues. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in this hadith Qudsi that those fulfilling the obligations is the best way to draw near to me. It's almost as if like that opens the door. And then optional deeds. Nawafil is that with which a person continues to draw near. Right? So, but the first step is the fara'id. And the secret to ibadah, therefore, is fulfilling one's obligations. I want to quickly share a quote from Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah, then I'll conclude, I think, because we're already out of time, but I'll quickly read through this. And this is related to how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's expectations of different people is based upon their circumstances and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has endowed upon them. It's based upon their potential. So in every person there is a certain amount of potential for goodness, and because each person is unique, the expectation from each person from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also unique. So you can't compare yourself to him, and you can't compare yourself to that other. You can't compare yourself to one another as far as the expectation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because Allah's expectation from each person is unique based on what Allah has endowed them. Does that make sense? And so Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah says in his famous book I'lam al-Muwaqqi'in that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prescribed upon every individual a servitude according to their status. So each person's servitude and service to Allah and the ibadah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is according to who they are and what their status is and what their circumstances are. And this is over and above the kind of requirements of worship that is general for everyone. So like the 5 pillars. The 5 pillars is an articulation of general requirements of servitude, right? What we call the general fara'id, or general obligation. But beyond that, it differs from person to person. So he says, so for example, the scholar, the alim, his duty to spread the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and spread knowledge, the knowledge and sunnah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent with the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is a duty that does not compare to that duty upon a person who doesn't have knowledge. Naturally, the duty upon the alim is far, far greater. And on the Day of Judgment, the way an alim would be taken to account for not spreading the deen, not spreading the sunnah, and not spreading knowledge, not teaching, not propagating, that accountability will not apply to a person who doesn't have knowledge, who has not been blessed with knowledge. So over here, the requirement of worship, the requirement of servitude is completely different for two different categories of people. Similarly, a ruler, right? A ruler and the requirement of servitude from the ruler in areas such as establishing the truth, such as establishing religion in society, right? Implementing a system of religion in society, like establishing justice, etc. And to require people to follow the law and follow the deen, and etc. And then to be patient in the face of any difficulties faced in that path. And the same is true of the alim. So when the alim tries to propagate deen and teach people, etc., there will be difficulties that they will face as a result. People might harm them and might say things to them, and life might become unbearable, and etc. But there's a requirement upon them that they have to persevere still, despite those difficulties. So he says about the ruler that if a person is being endowed with the position of rule, meaning that's what they've got, either they've inherited it or they've ended up in that position, then the duty upon them is not the same as the duty upon another person who hasn't been given rule, who doesn't occupy that position. There's no comparison between the two people. And then the obligation upon a person who is rich, right, to fulfill a far greater requirement when it comes to their giving their wealth and spending their wealth upon others, right, cannot compare to a person who has no money or less money. Similarly, and this is a useful one, a person who is capable of amr bil ma'ruf nahy anil munkar. So a person who has the capacity to command good, to enjoin good and forbid evil, right? So a person who has the capacity to do it, to enjoin good and forbid evil with his or her hand and tongue, right? That person, the accountability of that person compared to the person who doesn't have the ability is not the same. Meaning everybody cannot be expected to enjoin good and forbid evil to the same measure, because not everybody's capacity is the same. Not everybody's situation is the same. So for example, my ability to enjoin good and forbid evil upon my son, so two people may differ, and with the same person, their responsibility will differ in two different situations. So enjoining good and forbidding evil, as far as my son is concerned, I have far greater capacity then in that situation than I do when I've met a random man on the street. Right? My capacity. So my capacity to enjoin good and forbid evil with regards to somebody over whom I have authority, right, is different compared to someone over whom I have no authority. This one I'll be far more accountable for, the other one less accountable for, if accountable at all. So the situation is different depending upon the circumstances. All right, and there are, you can go on and infinitely kind of try to present examples of this, and it's extremely important to understand this, and it's therefore extremely important to always evaluate oneself and one's capacity as honestly as possible, right? And to constantly challenge oneself to try to recognize what one's duties are and what one is able to do. And the reason why this is quite a tough thing to do is because that balance, because there's harm associated with it. If you overstep, right? So this example of enjoining good and forbidding evil, if you overstep and start enjoying good and forbidding evil in the wrong place, at the wrong time, with the wrong person, you do more harm than good, right? But at the same time, if you fall short, right, then you allow evil to continue. Right? You allow evil to persist. So that balance is important, and achieving that balance requires a preoccupation. Does that make sense? Meaning, so for example, evil happens around us, and we're not bothered by it. Well, there's no preoccupation. If there's no preoccupation, you can't balance something. You know, there's no. You have to have balls in the air to be juggling, right? If you want to balance on a tightrope, you have to be on the tightrope, right? Meaning, naturally, there's a preoccupation. You're worried you're going to fall, right? Your mind is completely preoccupied with it. If there isn't a preoccupation with good and evil and overcoming evil and allowing good to flourish, then you walk past evil, and it never occurs to you whether you have the capacity or don't have the capacity to solve it. Meaning that we have to have a natural radar and an inbuilt inner intolerance of evil, which then provokes us to consider in any situation, can I do something here? Right? And then honestly kind of accepting sometimes, maybe frustratingly accepting that actually I can't. This one I can't change. Or perhaps I will do more harm than good. But the preoccupation is extremely important. Okay, inshallah. And we'll end there. Okay? Jazakumullah for coming back. I was a bit nervous about how many people were going to turn up today. Like after a 2-week break. Those of you who must go, you can go. Those of you who want to ask questions,
Let me just remind everyone for the 21st.
Oh yes, thank you. So 21st, I have to be at a conference at Cardiff University speaking over there, so I can't. We can't do the 21st. So the 21st will be cancelled. Okay. I'll remind everybody again next week. But so the 21st, and others who've been attending, if you're in contact, let me know. So next week will be as usual, and then on the 21st I'm traveling out for that conference. So basically that finishes at 5. So can't do that on the 21st. Okay, inshallah. Any questions? Anyone? It doesn't have to be related. Yeah, go on.
I just wanted to know, I do kind of know the answer to this, but where is Allah? Like, is he amongst us? Is he in us? And I don't know if this is a silly question.
All around us.
Yeah.
Because some people say he's amongst us, he kind of, we don't really hold those sort of beliefs. I mean, we know we're different.
Okay, so I mean the question is, a lot of people ask that question now because there is this revival of the apparent meaning of a hadith of the Prophet in Sahih Muslim, in which the Prophet ﷺ, to confirm the faith of a slave girl, asked her, "Where is Allah?" And she pointed. There's different narrations about what she did, but according to some of the versions of the hadith, she said he's in the heavens. According to other versions, she pointed to the sky and didn't say anything, etc. Which kind of lends a legitimacy to asking that question as a test of faith, right? And there's lots and lots of discussion about whether it's a good idea to ask that question or not, or whether the Prophet ﷺ, in asking her that question, it was okay for him to do that because the Prophet ﷺ understood something about her context, and so on. So first there is a question about whether the question is legitimate, right? So I suppose, given that it's precedented in hadith, we can say that it is legitimate. Then the answer to the question, the actual answer of where is Allah. So there's what the schools of thought say, what the theological schools say. This is a bit of a theological quagmire, right? I mean, in the sense that there are really complex statements, right, about how to respond to that in the various theological schools. So, for example, the traditional theological schools of the Ash'aris and the Maturidis tend to negate any reference of space to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they say that Allah transcends place and time. For the simple logic, for the simple reason that Allah is the creator of time and space. That time and space are both as we conceive of them. Time and space as we conceive of them are creations of Allah, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not exist within his own creation. Does that make sense? So it's almost as if to say that the question of where Allah is becomes it becomes a question that is beyond the scope of man. Right? It's almost as if to say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala transcends the question. When we say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala transcends, Allah is transcendent. He isn't just transcendent above the answer to the question or what the possible answer to the question is. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is transcendent above the question itself. The question doesn't apply because the question presupposes space. You understand? So space and spatial boundaries, and space is logically there's lots of people say about what we mean by space. So we mean by things that are within, like contained within the four directions. Space can define in terms of north, south, east, west, etc., etc. And traditionally, Muslim theologians have said that Allah is transcendent above. He transcends all of these considerations because all of this is part and parcel of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation. Right? An alternative view is to not definitively say that Allah is somewhere, but to commit to the expression that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made for himself in the Quran, and the expressions that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam has made in the Sunnah with reference to place. So if there are any wordings in the Quran that refer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as being somewhere, then we can legitimately use the same reference without necessarily knowing what that precisely implies. So therefore, there's a verse in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do you feel safe from the one who is in the heavens? أَأَمِنْتُمْ مَنْ فِي السَّمَاءِ أَأَمِنْتُمْ مَنْ فِي السَّمَاءِ. So man fi sama implies Allah, i.e. the one who is in the heavens. So there is a literal implication here that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in the heavens. So one school of thought, the Hanbali school of thought, the Salafi school of thought says that we are required shar'an. It is obligatory upon us to commit to the same literal reference. Right. So some of this wording I'm very carefully crafting because I don't like the way people have this conversation, and I think they word things in really difficult ways, and they don't know how to deal with the implications of their wording. So the literal reference here is something that we are allowed to use, and we leave it at that. We say this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has said with regards to him being in the heavens. We accept that. We accept that reference, but we don't know in what modality. So ultimately, you're kind of saying something, but not saying something. You're kind of saying, yeah, we accept the literal reference, but we don't really ultimately know. But to say that we don't know the modality is to say, but we don't really know how Allah is in the heavens. Does that make sense? So I suppose in that sense, to literally use the words, oh, Allah is in the heavens, or oh, the one in the heavens, please accept my dua, for example. To make those kind of references is permissible without necessarily without committing anthropomorphism, meaning without necessarily picturing Allah's presence, physical presence in a place. Okay? So where these two different schools of thought end up at loggerhead is if you were to throw the question to the Ash'ari and say, is Allah in the heavens? The Ash'ari will say, no, Allah is in no place. Allah is transcendent above the heavens. So, and then if you asked him, well, what does that verse mean then? He'll say, well, that verse simply is a literal reference to transcendence. Of what Allah means by Allah being in the heavens is Allah is beyond the heavens. Does that make sense? The other school of thought, if you ask them, when you say Allah is in the heavens, do you mean Allah is physically in the heavens implying a limited place in space? They would say, no, we simply commit to the literal reference, but we don't know the modality. So in a way, the difference isn't big, but it's made a lot bigger than it has to be, and they are at loggerheads. In my opinion, I believe that it's both permissible to attribute transcendence to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as well as accepting the literal reference as a literal reference. Does that make sense? I personally, I don't see a logical explanation other than transcendence. The idea of transcendence being that it's almost as if if you don't think of, when we reference Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if we can get beyond thinking in terms of space in a singular dimension, and we think in terms of dimensions, meaning in a slightly more complex way, then you can get beyond the need to think that somehow Allah and human beings occupy the same space. Does that make sense? Or people and His creation occupy the same space. Okay, so then what does it mean in the Quran when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that that there isn't a secret whispering between two people except Allah is the third, and nor a whispering between three people except Allah is the fourth, right? And then that kind of passage ends with وَهُوَ مَعَكُمْ أَيْنَمَا كُنْتُمْ, and He's with you wherever you are. What does that mean? Now, the answer to that is similar to the answer to the first question. So, number one, we believe literally that we believe that Allah is with us wherever we are, but we don't know in what modality. And another explanation for it is to say that Allah is with us wherever we are in His knowledge. Right? Meaning Allah knows what we do and what we say and what we think in such depth and detail that it's as though He is present. Right? How do we understand the verse وَنَحْنُ أَقْرَبُ إِلَيْهِ مِنْ حَبْلِ الْوَرِيدِ, that we are closer to man than his jugular vein? Right? So again, one interpretation is that Allah's knowledge of man and man's thoughts and man's words and man's deeds are so detailed and so absolute that it's as though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is present with man, right? And the other is to say, well, we accept we accept what the verse says and what the verse is implying in terms of Allah's proximity to man, but we don't know what that means in terms of physical modality, because we don't know anything about Allah's physicality, and we are always wary of saying anything that might attribute to Allah a likeness to His creation. So all of these conversations, therefore, are about ensuring that we do not commit tashbih, that we don't liken Allah to creation, because that bit is clear cut. Because Allah says in the Quran clearly, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٌ وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ. Nothing is like unto Allah, and He is all hearing and all seeing. So although Allah is all hearing, all seeing, and we see and we hear, despite that similarity, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٌ, nothing is like unto Him. So any conversation about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that brings that creates a parallel between the divine and between creation that conversation has to be a cautious conversation to ensure that tashbih isn't happening. Allah isn't being likened in any way to his creation. So those are, if you like, the principal boundaries of this conversation. Okay? Anything else? No? Go on.
Go ahead.
My question is basically related to what he's talking about in summer and stuff like that. Pretty much how do you reconcile? I mean, obviously, sabr tends to be, I guess, described statically to a certain extent, to have sabr, be a person of sabr. But how do you reconcile sabr with, I guess, the human being being created weak and falling short of, I guess, in maintaining sabr?
Okay. Well, perfection belongs to Allah anyway. So yes, we are weak, but within our taking our weakness into consideration, we're required to do our best. So patience is also subject to istighfar. Um, and the test of patience is a tough. Although we said that it's easier than the test of shukr, meaning qualitatively in some way, that sabr is easier than shukr, comparatively speaking. But perhaps that ease isn't. It's not a. When we say it's easy, we don't necessarily mean it's less painful. I mean, sabr is definitely more painful, but it's easier in that its requirements are easier to fulfill. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, for a multimillionaire in fulfilling their requirements of gratitude to give away lots and lots of money, for example, it's still a deed that's easy to do. I mean, they have to really work hard to put themselves in a challenging situation that might compare with the patience of a person who's kind of struggling to feed his family. Yeah. So it's not like when we say they're different, we're not putting them on the same playing field. They're qualitatively different as well. So and therefore, the patient when there are prophets who, when their patience was tested, they came close to reaching the point of despair. So there's a hadith of the Prophet ﷺ in which he says that the most tried of all people are the prophets, and then those most like them, and those most like them, then those most like them. أشد الناس بلاء الأنبياء ثم الأمثل ثم الأمثل. So the people most tested are people who are the most like Anbiya. And if people do not face test and tribulation, they should have this niggly sense in the back of their mind that something's wrong. That doesn't mean you throw yourself into difficulty because you're not supposed to. لا تسأل الله بل تسأل الله العافية. Don't seek tribulation from Allah, but rather seek safety from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there's this interesting, like the balance that we're trying to achieve is interesting, right? So whenever we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we don't say, Allah, I'm worried that if you don't test me, then somehow like I'm sinful, so please test me. We never say that. Rather, the Prophet ﷺ taught us, you always seek safety. You never seek test. You don't say to Allah, Allah test me. You always seek afiyah. Sallallahu afiyah. Afiyah is a complex word. Afiyah implies a circumstance of safety, of good health, of all of those good kind of meanings. But yet, we are people whose commitment to sabr makes us resilient to trial and tribulation, right? But it's never perfect, and that's our weakness. So when the prophets were tested, مستهم البأساء والضراء وزلزلوا حتى يقول الرسول والذين آمنوا معه متى نصر الله. So when describing the difficulties faced by people, مستهم البأساء والضراء, that they suffered war and difficulty, and they were shaken to the extent that the messenger himself, meaning the messenger of the time, right, the prophet of the time, and the believers who were following him, kind of cried out, right, when will the help of Allah come? But even they reached a point where they cried out in despair, Mata Nasrullah. And so Allah declared, Ala inna Nasrullahi qarib. It's as if they were pushed right to the brink before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's help came. So it's never easy, and even the best of people reach a point where it's as if like where do I go, and and what's left for me to do when they almost reach the point of despair. So for us, faith is about trusting that in any given situation, some sort of faraj or some sort of opening will come, right? Number one. B, that that opening could be in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala giving us the resilience to continue to persevere, right? Or C, that even if a given situation doesn't resolve itself in the way that we want, and the trial results in a complete collapse of some sort, so the loss of a limb, the loss of a loved one, the loss of a business, or something or other, something of value is lost. Essentially, therefore, you end up with irrecoverable loss. That one then recognizes that life is not made up of life isn't a trial, but a multitude of trials, and that where one has loss, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give them. So where at one where we have had difficulty, Allah will give us ease to balance it out, and that's where we take solace from Surah Al-Inshirah, Alam Nashrah. So there is this famous line of poetry. I can't remember who it is. I should remember who it is, but perhaps Imam al-Shafi'i or somebody like that. That إذا اشتد بك البلوى ففكر في ألم نشرح فعسر بين يسرين إذا فكرته فافرح. That when difficulty is amplified and you're struggling, then think about the Surah Alam Nashrah, because in Alam Nashrah Allah mentions عسر بين يسرين. He mentions one difficulty between two mentions of ease. When you think about that, rejoice, meaning that remember that overall, at the end of it, it will appear to you as though you had more moments of ease than moments of difficulty in your life, and that if you were to quantitatively try to measure it, it will be as though for every difficulty there were two moments of ease. Yeah. So life isn't it's not a continuum, is it? It's not that one's experience of difficulty and one's experience of difficulty are two different things. And then that experience of difficulty isn't a continuum. It's like suffering all the way through. But the way it plays out in our minds, or our experience of it, is in moments. We have, even somebody who suffers difficulty and so on has moments of joy. Somebody with severe disability still has moments of joy and moments of happiness and so on. So another really important insight is that difficulty looks completely different to two different people. So the person suffering difficulty and a person observing that difficulty have two completely different perspectives of it. We mustn't forget that. So often people who complain about the problem of evil and lose faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a result, the most powerful argument against God and the most powerful argument of the atheists is the problem of evil. But why is it evil in the world? But what's really ironic about the problem of evil is that usually the people suffering the evil and the people commenting on the evil have two completely different perspectives. Right? So there's an earthquake there's a tsunami in Indonesia. The people, when you observe the response of the people who've suffered the tsunami, it's completely different to the guy sitting in America talking about the problem of evil. And if God exists and if God is merciful, why is there a tsunami in Indonesia? The guy suffering under the tsunami can see God's mercy in it. But another person commenting from a distance is distancing himself or herself from God as a result of the same incident. Does that make sense? So it's, and there's no absolutes here. I mean, there could be an instance of another person who suffers a calamity and as a result of it distances themselves from faith. There's lots of examples of that. But no two people's experience of difficulty is necessarily the same. People's perspectives are completely different. Makes sense. Some people's resilience to trauma is unbelievable. Right? The way they're able to take it and the way their resilience to it, the way they bounce back from it. the way they declare their faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a result of it. Other people, their faith is strengthened as a result of it, and so on. And how a similar calamity for another person completely destroys their faith and completely weakens it, and so on. So it's very, it's quite complex in that sense, and everybody has to find their balance. Right? It's unique for each person. We shouldn't try to presume about the person suffering or about people that are suffering. We should only be concerned about what the requirements are upon us in that moment. Does that make sense? So empathy is hard for a reason. Because usually, although empathy requires you to put yourself in somebody else's shoes, usually it's almost never accurate. You can never accurately put yourself in somebody else's shoes because you are ultimately a different person. So you can only do your duty, and that's about it. Okay.
I had one.
Take the brothers go on, then we'll continue.
Is there a defined way to do shukr in Quran, Hadith? Or?
No. There's. I mean, yes, there are advisable ways. There are ways in which we're advised to show shukr. I mean, there's always shukr in words. Is a basic one, right? So to say Alhamdulillah and to say I am grateful to Allah Subhanahu wa Taala is an important first step. We have to pronouncing gratitude is important, right? If anything, it's a constant reminder that I'm to be grateful. I am grateful, but for that to carry through into one's actions is also important. And sometimes gratitude has to come from the bounty. So if Allah Subhanahu wa Taala has endowed wealth upon a person, then gratitude isn't simply to thank Allah for the wealth, but the gratitude has to involve the wealth. Does that make sense? And that is not using it in the haram, fulfilling the obligations of that wealth, going beyond the obligations of that wealth. The more responding in the spirit in which the wealth is being given to you. So if Allah is being very generous in the way in which He is giving you wealth, then you respond in kind by also being very generous with that wealth, right? Other bounties, obviously there are other great bounties like life, like every breath, like good health and things like that. For that, there are certain hadith that speak about taking advantage of 4 things before 4 things. Right? Make the most out of, in layman's terms, make the most out of 4 things before 4 things, or treasure 4 things before 4 things. Right? Your life before your death, your youth before old age, your health before sickness, and your wealth before poverty. Right? So it's almost as if gratitude is about taking advantage of Allah's bounties, right? As though you haven't got time. Does that make sense? So taking advantage of wealth before you end up with poverty is really about recognizing that ultimately, if you're not going to use it, you might keep what you might use for yourself, but perhaps if you're not going to use it for yourself, then realize that there is an inevitable poverty that's going to face me, which is going to be when, even though technically I own the wealth, I can't use it anymore because I'm in my grave. And therefore, before that happens, make the most out of it. And making the most out of it is to make the most out of it in a way that is pleasing to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. So, wealth is a good example for us because it's one of the bounties that we are envied for by people in our extended life or in our extended relations who look at us and think that we are more comfortable than they are. So we all have relatives back home who are poor who look at us with envy, right? Positive envy, let's just say, not in a bad way. Now, so so therefore, wealth is a good example. Now, when you look at wealth, when a person's attitude is correct with wealth, the Prophet ﷺ says that is something to envy. Right? So, لا حسد إلا في اثنتين. Hadith of the Prophet. There's no envy. There's no legitimate envy except in two things. You can look at two types of people and think, oh, I wish I had what they have, and that envy is a good envy, right? Because you're coveting something that is good. One is a person who has been given, there's different wordings in the hadith, but given knowledge, right? And so they use it to spread the truth, or given the Quran, they teach the Quran. Different wordings in the hadith. So meaning knowledge from the category of one is the person who is given knowledge and they use knowledge is their wealth and they share it with people. So that person can be the object of positive envy, in the sense that a person thinks, I wish I had what they have because they're reaping off the rewards. The second is a person who's been given wealth, right? And day and night he spends it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the wealth isn't envy, but the fact that they have it and they're able to spend it in the way of Allah. So a person envies them and thinks, if only I had the wealth they have, so that I could also spend day and night in the path. Those are the two people that can be legitimately envied, right? And the Sahaba did that. Right? They felt the envy. Poor companions went up to the Prophet ﷺ and they said, Messenger of Allah, ذهب أهل الدثور بالأجور. It's not fair. The rich guys are taking all the rewards, right? Because they pray as much as we pray, right? They fast as much as we fast, but then they go and spend all that money in the way of Allah, and that's something we can't compete with. So the Prophet ﷺ gives them some extra deeds. He tells them, every time you say Subhanallah, it's a sadaqah. Every time you say Alhamdulillah, it's a sadaqah. Every time you say Allah, it's a sadaqah. And he gives them all these extra adhkar to make up for the deficit. According to one narration, they come back to him and they say, the rich guys have found out about the extra things you taught us, and now they're doing it as well, right? And now they've got the advantage again. And in the end, the Prophet ﷺ had to say, well, that's Allah graces people the way He wants, right? That's Allah's grace, and He gives it to whomever He wants. There are certain things at the end of the day, Allah subhanahu. Perhaps if you were given that wealth, and the Prophet ﷺ didn't say that, but the kind of what you understand from that is, perhaps if you were given that wealth, you wouldn't be spending it the way he is, right? Perhaps it's good for him, but not good for you. But the point is that wealth can be a great thing if people are able to first keep their hearts empty of it, possess it in their hands, right, so that they can manipulate it for good. The danger of wealth is that most of the times people don't hold wealth in their hands. The danger of wealth is that most people fall into fitna and end up possessing their wealth in their hearts. And that's when it becomes dangerous. So that means that they love it. They don't see wealth as a possession that is dispensable. They look at it as something that is of value, of true value, and something that they love, and something that they desire and covet, and without it, their life is incomplete. Does that make sense? In a way, if you look at the early generations, the rich and the poor had a similar had a similar spiritual state as far as wealth was concerned, meaning that the rich and the poor were equally content. The poor were content in their state of poverty. The rich were content in the state of wealth, because neither had wealth in their hearts, regardless of how much they had in their hands. Does that make sense? Right? And they lived a life based on that. So they were, as much wealth as they had, they were more concerned about what they could do for the deen. It didn't matter to them if suddenly a call came and they gave all of their wealth away and they had to re-earn it or something like that. These things didn't matter to them because it wasn't in their heart at all. And their preoccupation in life wasn't with their wealth, but it was with their worship. It was with doing good in society, making a positive change in people's lives and so on and so forth. Their preoccupation wasn't with wealth. The biggest problem with the modern era is that our preoccupation is with wealth. Right? So we spend the majority of our day chasing after money. Right? And the only reason why we have to do that is because we are required by lifestyle The whole system is rigged to require us to earn more than we need, because the whole system requires us to live lives in a manner that is actually unnaturally luxurious.
We'll keep it balanced and knowing that the system is rigged.
I think we have to simplify our lives as much as we can, and try to make sure that what we preoccupy ourselves with is meaningful, right? In that it aligns with something that is of value, because our Deen values it. So if you were to evaluate your life and you find that you're spending 20 hours a week, big chunks of your life, in things that are completely trivial, then you've got to fix it. That makes sense? Or balance it out. Like if it's unavoidable that you're spending 10 hours a day at work, and your work is
It's quite normal.
but but some people spend 10 hours a day at work and their work is meaningful, right? Meaning that they value their work because their work aligns with their values, right? That's not everybody's blessed with that. So that's a point of evaluation, a choice of career, what a person is doing with themselves, etc., etc. For another person, they might be doing something that they don't necessarily value, but it's financially very, very rewarding, right? And that person has to think about, well, perhaps they can make up for it for the amount of time they spend earning money. They can make up for it by doing something constructive with that money. Other people, you'll find that they're actually totally wastefully spending available hours of their week doing useful things, and they don't know why they're doing it. It's just bad habits, addictions, etc., etc. And those things, those are, if you like, they're like weeds in our life, right? And you have to root them out, right? And find alternative things that are of value. So there is a kind of repair exercise that is needed when it comes to our lives, a kind of muhasabah. So you look at everything. We look at everything that we do, and we start to weed out, and then start slightly realign. Something you don't have to stop doing, just to realign your intentions. You understand? You have to align it to your values. And our values are Islam, or the values of Islam. And we have to realign it. At the end of the day, if we don't live life according to values, then our life is valueless. Right? So we have to identify Islamic values and align our life to them. And it's really useful to live your life like that, because then it's also easier to choose the right friends, to choose the right spouse, to etc., to judge relationships and the relationships that you invest time in, etc., because you judge everything based on alignment of values. And the more those values are important to you, the more you prioritize them over friendships and things like that. And therefore, you won't tolerate a friendship that doesn't align with your values, because you'll see that friendship as one that will take you down the wrong path. Right? So you'll give it up. One of the biggest crises that everyone suffers in the world right now is that they don't have a purpose in life based on a set of values, and therefore they can't make those. They have no basis for making those judgment calls. Life is always about those judgment calls. You're always making judgment calls. Is this a friend I can trust, or is it not? Is this a person I should spend time with, or not? Is this job something that I want to do or don't want to do? Or how do I make that judgment? Now, if money is an ultimate value in life, then you make the judgment based on money. Everything is aligned to money. Marriage is aligned to money, right? Or whether you're good to your parents or not is aligned to money. Right? I have lots to inherit from my parents, so I'm going to be good to them. Everything can align to money. So people do, but in a materialistic world, like usually, money plays a big part in those judgment calls and in those alignments in life. And it requires some we have to basically face up to some tough questions in private. Okay. It's not easy, but think of it as a process. Don't worry about the outcome. Don't worry about the result. Think of it as a process that you have to constantly undertake, and it's like a war of attrition. that you're trying to, like, when you go through the process once, you don't get much of a result. You do it again, and then it becomes a constant kind of niggly thought process in your mind. And eventually there is a war of attrition, and then you kind of wear yourself down until you eventually force yourself to do something about it. So again, it's a question of preoccupation. But if you're not preoccupied with it, and you're not thinking about it, then you just coast through life, and before you know it, you know, you reach the age where, well, inevitably, you kind of have to do the bare minimum. So you start attending masjid in old age. But some of the fundamental flaws in life that are embedded within you are still there, and you take them to the masjid with you, and you become a musibah for the whole masjid. We've all seen that, haven't we? All right, inshallah. So you were going to ask me? You've gone then if you want.
I'm ending the stream.
Might be long. Can I say it for next week?
Yeah, save it for next week. You give me an out like that, I'll take it. Aisha.